Good morning. We're going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. A lot of energy in the room this morning. That's outstanding. Good to see everyone. We've got let's go ahead. The Texas Government Code permits this Board of Trustees to meet in a closed executive session for the following reasons, among others: to consult with the college district's attorneys on matters deemed privileged by the Texas Disciplinary Rules of Professional Conduct or Government Code 551.071, to deliberate regarding real property under 551.072, a prospective gift under 551.073, certain personnel matters under 551.074, security devices or security audits under 551.076, and economic development negotiations under 551.087. If the board meets in closed session, we will announce the particular section under which we will be doing so prior to initiating the closed portion of the meeting. We're going to move to our invocation and pledge. We've got a couple of Blinn students here with us that I'm going to introduce today. Justice Schilling graduated from Burnett High School in 2022, where she was a part of the Esprit de Corps band program and the art program. Justice is a part of the Buccaneer Band and Kappa Kappa Psi, a service fraternity connected to the band. She finds the family she's found in the band program to be the best experience she's had at Blinn. a family built on music and brotherhood. Morgan Noel is a first-year Blinn student. She graduated from Katy Taylor High School, where she was part of the varsity wrestling team and also received her AutoCAD certification. After 2 more semesters at Blinn, she will be transferring to Texas A&M to pursue mechanical engineering. Welcome to both of you. Glad that you're here.
Father God, we gather here today under your care and protection. Thank you for your loving kindness that never fails us. We thank you for those with us, that you would guide our thoughts and actions to bring you glory. Strengthen us and fill us with your peace. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to the Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, ladies. Appreciate you both being here to help us this morning. Does not appear that anyone signed up for public comments, so we will just move into the report section of the agenda. The first report is Chancellor's Administrative Report. Dr. Hensley.
Thank you, Chair Colkhorst, and good morning, everyone. Isn't it lovely weather outside this morning, a little bit crisp? It feels just wonderful. Thank you for being here today. Trustees, I'd like to begin with a brief update regarding our current facilities projects. On College Avenue, the footing for the first retaining wall has been poured, and this project remains scheduled for completion next April of 2024. Moving over to the Bryan Campus Administration Building, work to bring fiber communications from Building A to the construction site is underway. Vaughn is bringing heavy equipment to the construction site to begin demolition activities, and design services for the monument are underway. This project still is scheduled for completion in February of 2025. Now, trustees, regarding another topic, Future Works Academy. Trustees, earlier this month, several of you represented the Blinn College District at the Association for Community College Trustees Leadership Congress, and you participated in a presentation describing Blinn's Future Works Academy to other community college trustees and administrators from across the United States. In particular, I would like to thank Vice Chair Allison Binke, Board Secretary Randy Wells, Trustee Diane Kettler, and Trustee Rebecca Ehlert for representing Blinn so beautifully at this conference. In our discussion of the Future Works Academy and its success at Blinn, Trustee Wells welcomed the audience and introduced our presentation team. Trustee Ehlert provided the audience with a brief overview and introduction to the Blinn College District. Trustee Binke discussed why it is important for Blinn to obtain ideas and innovations from faculty and staff from across our district. And Trustee Ehlert offered closing remarks and led the question and answer segment. Vice Chancellor for Academic Affairs, Dr. Marcelo Busicki, Dean for Academic Support Services, Dr. Joyce Lannenegger, and Dean for Student Engagement, Dr. Kenneth Macinda, also played key roles in this presentation. Given the success of the event and the positive feedback that we have received, I have invited Dr. Lannenegger to join us this morning to share details regarding this 2-semester leadership program open to all full-time Blinn employees. Dr. Lannenegger, won't you come forward? And as you do so, would you please introduce your fellows? And I thank you so very much for having everyone come today. I do recognize that there are 1 or 2 or more that may need to slip out at any time. Please feel free to do so. Thank you again and welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Hensley. Chair Colkhorst, members of the board, Chancellor Hensley, I'm going to try to remember to talk into this microphone. And I am so excited to be here today to share with you some information about our Future Works program and to introduce you to Class 8 of the Future Works Academy. As you remember, in February 2023, the Future Works Academy was selected as a finalist in the Bellwether Awards program. And as Chancellor Hensley has shared, just last week, we were all presenting at the Association of Community College Trustees. And I want to add that we were also very thankful that Dr. Hensley was in the room because she offered us a lot of support and, even more important, took the toughest questions in the room for us. This program has attracted national attention because of the frontline innovation programs that have been developed that are both sustainable and impactful. Over the past 8 years, Future Works Academy Fellows have developed an online orientation program for our eCampus learning management system that has served more than 50,000 students. They also developed an early registration program for our veteran students that is now implemented across the district. They have developed the Navigators program that provides faculty, staff, and peer mentors to students who are struggling with their academics. And this semester alone, we're serving about 300 of those students. They develop professional learning communities that come together every other week, about 30 to 50 faculty and staff, to discuss issues related to learning and student success. In addition, we are now in development of our Blinn Complete program. This is a program that identifies students who have 45 credit hours or more, seeks them out, connects with them, takes a look at where they are in their degree plans, and is working to get these students to graduate from Blinn College. And additionally, we are also working on a program called the Hub that is connecting students to resources across the campuses. Our co-facilitators, Chris Mars and Rachel Gallardo, I'm going to ask them to stand, please, also help in delivering this program. Chris is the executive dean at our Rellis campus, and Rachel is the department head for our psychology department. Thank you all. Although our current class has just begun, we're confident that they're also going to be able to offer us some really powerful ideas and programs when they have their graduation on Friday, April 12th, 2024. Please make a note of that date because you're invited to celebrate with us at their graduation on the Rellis campus and at their presentations of their projects. I would be remiss if I did not thank you all, Dr. Hensley, Dr. Busicki, for your support of this program and keeping us alive, well, and kicking. Our class began its session this year at Camp Allen. I'll tell you that this photo was taken after a day mostly outdoors on September 8th. Now, you may not remember September 8th. These guys do. It was 107 degrees that day. and class members have suggested that perhaps we should not take the photos at the end of the day, that we should maybe take the photo at the beginning of the day next time when we're not at the end of a grueling afternoon in the Texas sun. I would now like to introduce you to our FutureWorks Class 8 and FutureWorks Fellows. I'm going to ask you to stand as I call your name. And we have at least one FutureWorks Fellow who's joining us online. So Regina, I'm going to ask you to put your camera on. Thank you. And we have a few others who are teaching classes and unavailable to join us today. So this is FutureWorks Class 8, Jessica Briscoe, Student Conduct Coordinator and Title IX Investigator. Brian Carlisle, Director of Safety and Risk Management. Ashley Davenport, Assistant Director of Advising in Bryan. Misha Enos, English instructor on the Brenham campus. Kim Gonzalez, Business Programs faculty on the Bryan campus. Gail Graves, Testing Specialist in the Office of Disability Services on the Brenham campus. Frank Jaramillo, Division Operations Coordinator for Natural and Physical Sciences. Heather Kennedy, Veterinary Technology Program Instructor on the TAMU campus. Mary Keeker, Parallel Studies Instructor on the Brenham campus. Jason Lloyd, Director of the Fire Sciences Program on the Rellis campus. Ryan Miller, Director of Student Leadership and Activities on the Bryan campus. Erica Thurman, Assistant Director of Academic Advising in Brenham. Ashley Youngs, Director of Housing in Brenham. Joining us by Zoom is Regina Peters, who is an English instructor on the Bryan campus. We also have a few members who were not able to join us this morning. Mark Collins, Director of Financial Aid and Scholarships and Veteran Services in Bryan. James Dyer, Assistant Dean for Natural and Physical Sciences. Sherry Hilding, Geology Instructor on both the Bryan and Brenham campuses. And Mark Hutchinson, Assistant Dean for Natural and Physical Sciences. Trustees, I present to you FutureWorks Class 8.
Thank you, Dr. Lannenegger. And again, thank you so much. We're so proud of our future leaders for Blinn and your current participation this year. I know is just going to be wonderful. Dr. Lannenegger, thank you for your leadership in each year, and we so appreciate all that you do. Thank you again also for your presentation that you did and helping to pull all of that together. She was also our slide operator, and she was sharing with me that everybody else got to go up and do their part, and you know, you just kind of sigh internally when your part is over, right? But she felt like she couldn't sigh until the very end, and she hit the very last slide. So thank you so very much. Chair Colcourse, at this time, I'll return the podium back to you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Dr. Hensley. And thank you guys for your participation in that program. That just shows extra dedication to being a professor, and thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the presentation of the financial statement package for the period ending September 30th, 2023. Dr. Clan Burton.
Good morning, Chancellor, trustees. We'll give you September's results. So starting with, at the end of September, we've completed 8% of the year. This presentation will cover unrestricted cash and cash equivalents, revenues, expenditures, financial results, and additional observations. The unrestricted cash and cash equivalents, looking at this pie chart here, we have $59 million in unrestricted reserves, $35 million being used for current projects, and $31 million available for future projects. A more detailed background of the slide, we have $127 million. 59 million, again, are for reserve balances, and that includes 5 months of reserve, and the other one is R&R for 15 million. For projects, we've got the Brenham Street approval, street renovation, and the Bryan campus roof replacements, and then the Bryan campus administration building. We also have 5 million for additional land acquisition. So that gives a total of 35 million encumbered, and then we have 31.5 million remaining for additional items. Student financial aid, this is the cash received. The college received almost 18 million from financial aid. We received about 7 million from payments to students, and then we had refunds issued to students from grants and financial aid, and that gave a net receipt from the students of 14 million. Keep in mind that the payments received from students include payments for housing and for the bookstore, Buck Books. State appropriations is zero. However, we received 50% of our state funding this past week, which was $16.8 million. So we won't have any more state appropriations come to us till February, but in the meantime, we received 50% of our appropriation. We also have $400,000 in interest, in which if we keep up, that would be $4.8 million, well above the $2.5 million that the college budgeted. Grants and contracts miscellaneous was $45,000 and $4,000 from property tax, because it's a time of the year where that's not very common to get funds for. So the total cash received from other sources was $450,000. Cash outflows, payrolls were $6 million, accounts payable were almost $4 million, construction and R&R was about $700,000, and then the amount of student collections that went to Servitas, who does our P3s, was $3 million. So the total use of cash was $13 million. This next slide takes the previous 3 slides and puts it into one slide. So you can see the cash received from students is $14 million. The cash received from other sources is about $400,000. The college paid out $13 million, so there's $900,000 or almost $1 million to the good. Keep in mind, there was no state appropriation in these cash receipts. Moving forward to talk about revenues. This is on the accrual basis. What we talked about previously was the cash basis. So state appropriations are 10% of our, 1/12 of our state appropriations. If you look, we have revenues from the accrual basis of $14 million, and our revenue last year was $13 million. So right now, we're up $1 million. But keep in mind, this is September. It's really hard to develop a trend after the first month of the year. Going through, this is some previous trends from previous September 30th. And state appropriations are up as we expected. And then tuition and fees, again, there's an accrual. This doesn't include the second 8-week semester into the tuition. Moving on, again, the budgeted state appropriations are $26.4 million. The accrual method is $2.7 million, so we've gotten about 10%. Our budgeted tuition and fees are $75 million. We've received about $8 million in the accrual method, so that's about 11%. Looking at more detailed of the tuition revenue, you can see that the out-of-district is the lion's share of the revenue from tuition that the institution generates. Moving forward, there's the general fees, the lab fees, and the workforce fees. As you can see, that the general fee is a significant portion of the fees that the college generates. Looking at housing, again, this is the accrual method, so we only get a portion applied to the revenues. But one thing to note is that the occupancy rate is higher than the college budgeted, so we anticipate positive returns on this particular area of revenue. Auxiliary services, again, housing is going down, and that's due to the P3 element of the project. Food service is going up, bookstore has increased, and then parking has a slight downtrend. Moving on to expenditures, the college spent $11.2 million in the first month. This is still within our budgeted, projected budget that the college has put together. Again, the payroll is the largest amount of expenditures for the college. Insurance, we had a big insurance payment this past month. Salary and benefits, this is more of an adjustment for an accrual basis. As time goes on, we should expect to see the salary and the benefits to pass 2023. General education expenses are a little bit above. But again, this is September, so it's hard to develop a trend. Comparing operating expenses by function, instruction is the largest percentage. Moving forward to our financial results. This past month, we had $14 million in revenue, we had $11 million in expenses, and we have $2.9 million to the positive. The statement of budgeted revenues, again, the college has solid revenues. Expenses are contained, and so our expenditures, the change in fund balance, we anticipate an increased change for this particular month for almost $3 million. Observations: the college is in good financial health. Every key revenue area, we should exceed our budget. State appropriations, tuition, auxiliaries, they all look very good. Expenses, we're anticipating being below budget. So are there any questions? Yeah, please.
I have a question. You had mentioned parking had gone down. Is there any particular reason for that, Dr. Burton?
I will look into that and get you an answer if anybody has an answer. I'll follow up with that on you, please.
Thank you.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
I just had one question because I was looking at custodial services, and our actual this year showed the negative, and I was like, is that a refund? Is that a?
What that was an accounts receivable that needed to be adjusted at the end of the year, and that once that receivable, it was due to federal grants, from what I understood, some sort of. And so going forward, it will net out to the zero. But let me just give you a confirmed answer, if I may, when over the month. But I'd ask the same question, and that.
Yes, there's another one, and I think it's the one we were talking about and couldn't find. That was miscellaneous revenue.
Correct.
And it was on our page 9.
And that is due to that is due to the opening page 9.
Well, it's 4 or 9.
Okay, again, that was a beginning month adjustment, because this is the beginning of the year that had to be done to get the books open. So it was moving over from the prior year, an adjustment to close out the previous books, so.
I have a couple of questions. First one, real minor, but what is the revenue from the foundation?
That is not included in this presentation, but I can. That's a separate item. And let me confirm that I'm correct on that. That it is that is not included in this particular. The foundation is a separate entity for the college.
Right, but you have a line item here under miscellaneous revenue that says foundation.
And where is that?
On the, I don't know what numbers are, but it's on your page that talks about your total operating revenue. It's $21,000 for the foundation.
Let me confirm that, but I believe this is money from the foundation that comes to the college. Is that correct?
Yes. When we build the foundation, they may receive some money.
I'm sorry, Vicki, can you please come forward on the mic?
Yes, Dr. Krausen. A lot of times the foundation will receive certain monies for certain programs or a purpose at the college, and we will go ahead and spend that money and build the foundation, and then we will record a revenue and a receivable so we can track it to make sure that the college does receive the money, and then we take it off the books so that it nets off to the
At some point in time,
expenditure.
there's a like expense.
Yes,
for
sir.
the foundation.
Yes,
Okay.
sir.
Okay. My second question is on our payments to Servitas, does that go into the line item housing expenses?
It's a pass-through, correct? And so it comes in as and I'm looking to make sure.
Well, and I'll just preface that with saying the line item for our housing expenses is 109% higher than it was last year.
Yeah, please.
Yes, sir. Even though the P3 is with Servitas, we do have some college expense that does go with Prairie League especially. We have the RA scholarships. That is a college expense. It is not a Servitas expense. So that we will keep with us. Currently, the insurance is a college expense, and then we will bill Servitas for the insurance, and we will recover that cost. So you will see that kind of go up and go down slightly.
Okay. This seems kind of high if we cut the number of dorms that we own that are filled. I'm, I guess, shocked that that number is so much higher than it was last year.
I'll check into it.
Yep.
You have another question? Okay.
Does anyone else have any questions? All right, thank you, Dr.
Thank you.
Burton. Okay, we're going to go ahead and move into the consent item portion of our agenda. All items listed in this portion of the agenda are considered to be routine by the Board of Trustees and will be enacted upon one motion. There will be no separate discussion of these items unless the trustees so request, in which event the item will be removed from consent and considered in discussion and possible action. Trustees receive agenda materials in advance of the meeting to prepare for the business to be conducted. Pretty short consent agenda this morning. It's simply the approval of the minutes for September 18th, 2023 regular meeting. I would entertain a motion.
I move that we accept the consent agenda.
Trustee Wells makes a motion.
I'll second it.
Trustee Aylert, second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Consent agenda passed. Thank you so much. Now we'll move into the discussion and possible action item portion of the agenda. One item on the agenda, update and discussion regarding Blinn College's district bond capacity. Dr. Burton?
Good morning. I'd like to introduce representatives from Specialized Public Finance, Inc., or SPFI. The first person to introduce is Stephen Adams. Stephen Adams has been working with Blinn since 1995, when Blinn financed its first Bryan campus. He's a founding member of SPFI in 2008. He has 30 years experience in the finance industry. He is a graduate of the University of Texas with a BA, and he is a graduate of Texas A&M with an MBA. Accompanying him today is Paul Jansen. Paul has 23 years experience. He is a partner at SPFI. He worked at Standard & Poor's, or S&P, for 9 years prior to joining SPFI. He's a graduate of Texas Tech with a BBA and the University of Dallas with an MBA. Ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Thank you, Glenn. Stephen Adams, again, Paul Jason. We're doing a presentation regarding several items regarding your debt. We've been working with Glenn and Leighton and Vicki and others on this, so there's a lot of people that have input. At the same time, just coincidentally, Standard & Poor's is doing a review of really every community college because they've changed their standards for how they're applying ratings. So Paul is helping on that since he used to work there, and it's his old buddies. And we've been in extensive talks with S&P with regard to some of the data that we're presenting you today. And so they will have a rating up announcement about the college probably within the month. So I want to start talking about the outstanding debt of Blinn College and colleges in general. And I want to also start saying, if you have any questions, just go ahead and ask them now as we go. I know the agenda says there's 45 minutes for this. That's only going to happen if you ask questions. So I don't have that much data. But so generally speaking, community colleges can issue two types of debt. Tax-supported debt, which is usually voted bonds, but there's also tax notes and some other things you can do. Blinn doesn't have any of this type of debt outstanding, but what you do have is a lot of revenue bonds. And the reason you have a lot of revenue bonds is because relative to other community colleges, you have a small tax base and a large student population, particularly in areas outside of your tax base. It's a very unusual college from that regard. But you know, you've been very successful at it. So it's really served the college well selling these revenue bonds. Okay. when we set the revenue bond system up, we set it up back in 1995, and I was working at that time. The board wanted to move into a real campus in Bryan. They had some storefronts and other things. The city of Bryan wanted them there because everything was moving into College Station, and they actually sold the first bond issue for that campus. The city of Bryan did. However, we set it up as if it were a revenue bond of Blinn College because we knew there were going to be other bond issues that followed. And the entire revenue bond structure that you have today is based back on that very first bonds that were sold by the city of Bryan in 1995. We set up a revenue system, and what you see right here is what we put together to set up that revenue system. We had combined fees. We call it combined, it's now tuition. Before there were some legislation changes, there were several other fees that community colleges could charge. That legislation changed, and it now is all tuition. We set up a revenue system, which we'll go through in a minute, but it's basically your bookstore system, your parking system, your cafeteria system. And that's a second revenue source that goes into that. And then finally, the other pledged revenues, the most of which are out of district fees. So all of those together are all of the revenues that are pledged to the bondholders. The bondholders have the right to those revenues. There are other revenues that they don't have rights to because your total revenues are probably in the $120 million range. So if you look at that compared to your debt service, you have roughly 5 times more revenues than you have annual debt service, which is one of the reasons you have a very high credit rating for a community college system. I think I've kind of gone through these, but in a little bit more detail, the net revenues of the revenue system. So we have, in addition to what I said, I think I didn't mention housing and then interest earnings. The other pledged revenues are lab fees and out-of-district fees and general fees, and the out-of-district fees are by far the largest of those. And then you have other revenues that we cannot legally pledge. We can't pledge state appropriations. We cannot pledge your property taxes to revenue bonds, and we cannot pledge grants. So all of those together are what we can and can't pledge of the revenues coming into the system. When we sell revenue bonds, you have covenants. The revenue bonds that you sell define what happens to those pledged revenues as you receive them and the way they flow through your system. So whenever you set your rates and charges, you have a bond covenant that says your revenues must be 1.2 times your debt service. And remember, we're at 5, so we're well in excess of that. You have to have a reserve fund. Basically, it's 1 year of debt service. In case, for whatever reason, you don't have revenues, you pay for it out of that reserve fund, and then you have to replenish it over a 5-year period. And then finally, before you can sell additional bonds, your revenues have to be 1.2 times your current plus any additional debt. The reality of it is the amount of debt you can issue is controlled by your budget, meaning how much of your revenues can you spend on debt service versus other operations of the college. That's how this board has traditionally looked at it, and it's how the rating agencies look at it. So let's talk a little bit about your current bonds. You currently have 5 bond issues outstanding. Your debt service is roughly $4 million a year. Your principal payments, your total principal you're paying off is roughly $4 million a year. It increases a little bit over time as your interest portion goes down, but as you can see, you have $99,465,000 in revenue bonds outstanding. This year, it just dipped below $100 million, so that's a good thing for the college. This is a graph of what your principal and interest currently look like. You can see it's level through approximately 2032. It then starts going down over time. So you have more capacity over time. And again, we'll get into how much more you could sell in terms of the percentage of your budget you would spend on debt service here in a couple of slides. But this is kind of an interesting slide. This is a graph of historical interest rates going back to 1979, and you can see we've marked the points that when you've sold your bonds, and you see in 2019 and 20, you sold your last two bond issues at what was pretty much the lowest time to sell bonds in the history of the bond market. It happens to be the time when the government was spending a lot of money and putting a lot of money out there to help us recover from COVID. That drove interest rates down. They've since come back up a little bit, but even now they're still relatively low. And the good thing about those interest rates coming up is that you have a lot of cash, and the investment rate on your cash has gone up along with those interest rates. Back in the 20s and before, really since 2008, you really couldn't earn much on your cash, and now you're probably earning, in the 5% range. Okay, so moving forward, we've been talking to your staff and people and Paul and about what do you have moving forward? What are your plans? How much capacity do you have? And how could you spend it? Now, I want to say one thing about everything we have moving forward. Let's see if I can't move that. There it goes. Before we can give any real answers or advice about moving forward, what we have to do is look at all of your plans, and we know you've got a lot of plans. We've got to know exactly what those are and set up pro formas of how much we can spend on cash, how much we can spend on debt, how much debt service you can afford, what do you need for minimum cash levels. And before we can do that, we have to run what I think are probably some elaborate pro formas, which is what we did way back in 1995 when we had to justify to this board that you could pay for that building. We did it by running these cash flows and these revenues and projections based on growth. And we're going to have to do the same thing because some of the projects you're looking at now are pretty large and they need to be carefully evaluated. So those are the things we've been looking at, we've been charged to look at. How much cash can you spend? What's your debt capacity? How can we help improve your ratings? So that's what we've been starting to work on with your team here at Blinn. Okay, so when we look at cash, as I previously mentioned, Standard & Poor's came out with new criteria for all community colleges. So we have that criteria. We've let Dr. Burton look at it. We've looked at it. We've talked to Standard & Poor's about it. And they look at two criteria to maintain kind of where you are. So what they do in this new criteria, they have many different aspects. They have a management, they have cash, they have coverage, and each one of those has a rating, a weighting. So there's no one of these that in particular can raise or lower your rating. So you may have one of their categories where you fall lower than where you currently are, yet another one where you're higher. They take the whole thing into account. They take it to a credit committee and evaluate your rating. So some of the ones we talked about are your cash should be roughly half of your debt. Now, this is an interesting number for Blinn College because you have a lot of debt, revenue debt particularly, compared to other colleges because of the way you are. I'm not aware of another college that has a relationship with a large university that you have, which creates so much demand and out of your taxing jurisdiction that creates this situation. So under that scenario right now, that would mean, you would have to leave $50 million in cash. On the other hand, they have another criteria that says, well, you need to have at least 30 million of your expenses. Well, your expenses are 120 million. That's a lot less than 50 million. So we're going to have to weigh that. And again, look at all their criteria and talk to them. Look at your pro forma before we can come back to the board and say, hey, we think you can spend 50 or 60 million of your cash. But we will be ready to do that at some point in the future. When we're talking about how much debt service can you afford, this board's been conservative. It's looked at 7% or so of its total operating revenues can be in debt service, and the other 92 it likes to spend on instruction and buildings and maintenance and everything else to remain competitive and provide good services. S&P says, well, we're okay with you going up to 10%. So this is really a budgeting matter of the board and the staff that we'll also have to work through. So those are the two things that we'll have to work through before we have specific recommendations. So just some kind of back of the envelope using our current outstanding debt. If you remain at 7% of your revenues to be debt service at current interest rates, we think that you have 35 million in capacity. If you decide to go up to spending 10% of your total revenues on debt service, we think you have $95 million in debt capacity. So again, we'll look at that compared to your cash and what how much you have to spend to meet your expansion goals and come back with some specific recommendations. And of course, we need board input on your feeling of risk, your feeling of debt, your feeling of how much cash you like to keep in this process. So it's gonna be a communication process, not us directing to you, this is what you need to do kind of process. We'll want your input as well. So one of our questions was, how can we improve our credit rating? And I will say this, we think you're in a position that you will receive an upgrade in your credit rating. We think there's a high probability of that, talking with Standard & Poor's and walking through their new criteria. Now, we haven't showed them, hey, yeah, but going forward, we've got all these future debt plans. We're going to have to go through that as well, and that's going to be important to them. But as you sit right now, you're in pretty good shape. So one thing that they internally do is they look at your population as only the taxing jurisdiction that you're within. So that's Washington County. Well, obviously, in our opinion, that's very unrealistic for this particular college. It's different than almost every other college that they're going to look at. So we have to make an argument to them and to change their criteria as it relates to this college, just this one, their criteria, not ours. And if we can do that and we can look at a population base of where you really draw students from, that will move you up on their category, because if you have a larger population base, you get a higher credit for that little weighted area of their rating. So we're going to do that by presenting them demographic information of where your students come from. And we're going to probably be able to show them it's from counties a lot larger than this one. This is where a lot of your students come from. And so that's our plan. Obviously, growth, adding FTEs, adding students. I'll let Glenn correct me on this, but when COVID came, all credits that rely on students for revenues struggled. It went down, including Blinn College. I think now you're up 4%, is what we were talking about, right? So You've turned that around after COVID, and that's a really good thing. And if we can keep that trend going, that will help your credit rating, and I think you're in a good position to do that because I believe A&M's going to continue to grow their student population. If you add campuses and other growth areas, you'll be able to do that as well. And if we run pro formas that show that not only you're doing that, but it makes financial sense to do that, that will help. This last one, continue strong operation margins, even with this growth. What I'm trying to put together with this, there's a lot of pressure in higher education credits right now. Over the previous maybe decades, colleges, particularly private colleges and others, have been offering courses that to help market their students, but those courses didn't make financial sense. In other words, it cost them more to have that class than that class brought in as revenues. What we're seeing now is colleges dropping sometimes entire departments, but for sure classes. So, you know, that's something that Blinn is going to have to look at. Is every class that you're offering either providing incremental value, or is it helps with the overall student enrollment? So all of these things will help the margins, and you're going to have to continue to maintain margins to continue your to have better ratings, and also to have more resources to providing students services. Now, this is just a graph of the 35 million, and we looked at that chart a while back, and we could see the debt falling off in 2033. So to get to that 35 million, we've not started amortizing debt until 2033, but I want to talk about that for a minute. This is based on kind of revenues based on a 2024 budget. We know you're going to be growing. We know you're going to be increasing your fees and tuition. So over time, your revenues are going to increase, you know, every year, most likely. So you'll probably have, the longer we wait, the more capacity you'll have. The closer we'll come to those bonds paying off, the more revenues you will have. So this is just right now, 35 million, with 7% of your revenues being used for debt service. Now, if you use 10%, now you can start amortizing at least some principal a little bit earlier. But again, this is a one-time snapshot. So as your revenues grow, you'll have more capacity. Going back to our earlier conversations, you know, we're going to take this slide, compare it with your cash, how much you can spend, and also when do you sell this debt? You sell part now, part later, all now, keep your cash later. So we're going to have some options to look at as well. So in each one of these capacities, we've assumed you fund a reserve fund out of bond proceeds. You've historically done that out of cash, but that's something that we'll talk about as well. So the $95 million debt leads to $90 million in projects, and if you use your own cash, that just takes it out of the cash side. So it's kind of a wash. And then a $35 million bond issue leads to a little bit over $34 million in project cash. So that's all I have. I think when Dr. Burton ended his presentation, he said that college is in good financial shape. We agree with that statement. We think you're in great financial shape. We think you're in a great position to get a rating upgrade as you sit now. And we think you're in a great position to look at some future expansion projects that I know you're considering. So, Chairman, Chancellor, hand the floor back to you and be glad to answer any questions.
I've got one question, just point of clarification and understanding. Is it better to sell your bonds in a high interest rate environment or a low interest rate environment?
Well, obviously in a low interest rate, but in this scenario, we have to look because we're selling tax exempt bonds at right now, probably below your investment rate. So we need to look at that at the time we're selling our debt. Because if you can make more on your cash than you're selling your debt for, you'll want to consider that. Until recently, you couldn't do that. Your debt was always a higher rate than your cash. But that has flipped in the last few months. So that's one thing that we look at, and it'll be part of our consideration because those interest earnings, they're going to be a lot of money on the amount of cash you have. I will say this, from a rating perspective, you're probably better to hold on to that cash while you're selling your bonds. They like you to have cash in case something doesn't turn out the way you thought it would. You still are sitting on cash, and that's very important to them. So there's a couple of considerations there that we have to take into account.
When do you think this potential rating change would take place?
We owe them some information that I know your finance staff is working on. After that, we're going to have a call with them that we'll have to prepare for, and I expect that to be within a month. After we do all that, they have to schedule and go to a committee. That's probably a couple of weeks on their side. Is that about right?
I have a question.
Dick Rudy?
So we have some homework to do on our end, developing our potential projects, how much money we would need and so forth. Once we get to that point, how long does it take for your firm to prepare the, not offering statement, but the preliminary official statement? What is the timing on that? How long does it take, that process, once it's back into your hands?
I think if the board said go, we usually come to a board meeting and say, okay, we're about to prepare for selling bonds. We're going to start talking to outside entities, rating agencies, bond lawyers, everybody else. Tell us go. And then usually 2 months later, we'll be selling the bonds. So during that 2 months, we'll be doing what you're talking about, preparing the offering documents, attaining the ratings. Hopefully, they'll be fresh because we'll just looked at it. And then we'll sell the bonds at roughly 2 months later. After that, bonds all have to be approved by the Attorney General's office in Texas, any bond issued by any political subdivision, including state agencies. That's about a 30-day process. So we would have cash in roughly 90 days from when we completed all the analysis that you're talking about, come to the board and say, okay, we're going to start selling bonds. Tell us you're ready.
One more question. When you, I've heard the phrase timing is everything in issuing bonds. Does that go back to Jim's question in looking at your interest rates, how much cash you have on hand, what the current environment is and so forth? What are your thoughts on that?
What our thought is that nobody can predict interest rates, and we need to execute a financing plan that includes cash and debt whenever. And we let the projects dictate and the cash flows dictate when we sell bonds. And that's all we can do.
Anyone else have any questions? Appreciate the presentation. Glad to have you guys working with us and helping us on this project.
Well, we appreciate it, and as I've been working with this college probably longer than any other client. I tell everybody I'm your longest employee. So anyway, we appreciate it as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, do we need to take an action on that? All right, yes, it looks like we are going to need to have a motion that the board receive and discuss an update regarding Blinn College District's bond capacity. We don't need to vote on that? Okay, so we're good. All right, well, that takes us down to the executive session portion of the agenda. And we will be going into executive session in accordance with 551.071 and 551.072. I'd suggest we take a 10-minute break and then kick into executive session. It is 10:57 a.m.